Hello there. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's good to be back with you all to continue our reading and study of Fritz Peters' Balanced Man. And I must say, I'm thoroughly been enjoying the Fritz Peters journey we've been on, reading first Boyhood with Gurdjieff, then Gurdjieff Remembered, and now Balanced Man. And he has a very different taste to the likes of Ouspensky and Bennett, and it's almost like every author who was with Gurdjieff and wrote about him has a different taste, a different perspective, and something different that they focus on. And Fritz Peters, I suppose to summarize, he's like the experience. It's all about the experience for him, and he says in a couple of places he doesn't like the intellectualizing of Ouspensky. And so I'm very much looking forward to sharing this with you. Hello there, everyone. Joining and watching and listening. I think we could, like I say, we'll finish this over the next few days and then maybe throw in Ouspensky's Fourth Way. And then I think on Sunday we will read our next Dostoevsky's The Double. And so if all that is of interest to you and you're looking forward to everything coming up here at the channel, please consider liking the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show with all of your friends. You can sign up to the app. I'm nearly finished now, about 10 or so chapters of Beelzebub's left, and then that'll be all up on the channel. And if you'd like to get a copy of my own writing, Awakening the Machine, Gurdjieff Today, and my perspective of Gurdjieff in the light of science and new findings in ancient history, well, you can find that in the link in the description. But for now, not for now. First, I'll say hello there, Graham. Lovely to see you, my friend. I hope you're doing well. And hi there, Melissa's Mind. Thanks for sharing. And Stephen Lance says, joyous greetings from this point in space and time. So, yes, from me to you, joyous greetings, Stephen Lance, from, I suppose, we're in the same point in time, are we not? We're in the same point in time, but different space, obviously. Otherwise, Stephen would be here on my lap. But, welcome, Stephen, and hello there, 590. Greetings from the laundry room. So someone's being very efficient and multitasking, doing their laundry whilst listening. So welcome, 590. We have arrived at chapter 6. What I think most of us came to understand, and I'm not speaking primarily of the children at the Priory, is that life is an incredible adventure and that death, whatever else it may be, is also at least a potential miracle. Man's impulse to fly into outer space, climb Mount Everest, hunt man-eating sharks, go around the world in a sailboat alone, dive to the bottom of the sea, etc., seemed to me to be only the physical counterpart of the search for and development of a higher self. So I find the daily risks of life anywhere. Why freeze to death in the Alps when you are just as likely to drop dead if you fall off a ladder in a bathroom? As exciting as any other hazardous occupation, and it's a lot less expensive. I do not know, how could I, if there is an afterlife, but I'm certainly going to find out whether I want to or not, because the only way I can find out is by dying. Also, if there is an afterlife, it has at least a 50% chance of being a miracle. If it is simply going to be the end of everything, then at least I won't have to go through the process of earning a living at some dreary job and paying for the antics of the federal government every year. Also, given the possibility that death is just the end, then my only alternative is to get as much as I can out of this life while I am living, to enjoy it fully. In the philosophical sense, quote, to be immediately aware of, not as an object of thought, but as a phase or ingredient of one's own conscious state or activity, end quote. And that's from the Webster's Third International Dictionary. And he's being very introspective, isn't he, and thinking about death and what it all means and where we go when we leave this mortal realm, when we leave our physical bodies, what happens and where do we go? And as he's saying, it's all very well speculating and reading religious books about it, but we won't know until it occurs. Sorry. In other words, an acceptance of the fact of one's own death is a potentially winning ticket. That it may be at least 50% a losing ticket is also true. Perhaps this is simply the difference between optimism and pessimism. Whichever view one takes, and it is difficult to believe that anyone interested in philosophies which may lead to greater development of one's potential ability to achieve an harmonious state of consciousness, which is surely the main aim of Gurdjieff's teaching, is a pessimist by nature. The view of the possible afterlife or after death is something that can be self-instilled. It is not an automatic result of one's heredity or conditioning, and the recognition, the awareness of death, is one of the first necessary steps in what Gurdjieff tried to convey to his students. Admittedly, it is easier to convey a concept or an idea to children than it is to adults. Children are not only more receptive, but they do not have all those associative, habitual reactions to new ideas. They are curious, usually eager to learn, and they have not surrounded themselves with the emotional, mental, and physical attitudes that make it difficult or even impossible to reach their essences. For all these reasons, I feel that it was the children at the Priory who were the most fortunate. I, for one, was not yet numb with despair, or embarked on that perilous road to wisdom or development through the mind which so many people of all ages seem to be taking today. Wisdom, if that is the correct word, is of different kinds. Physical wisdom is transmitted physically, emotional wisdom emotionally, and intellectual or mental wisdom is transmitted through the mind and through the transmission of ideas from one person to another. But when all learning is confined to thinking, it only makes the process difficult. It is comparatively easy for one to learn how to plant a rosebush by watching the gardener. It is a great deal more difficult to plant that same rosebush if one has to first learn mentally what a spade is, how to use it, etc. If one has never seen a spade, it is really hard work to translate the mental concept of a spade into an actual spade so that the body will know what it is and how to use it. My body understood, without words or explanations, how to work at all kinds of things at the Priory simply by the process of physically watching other people do those things. Watching someone fry an egg for the first time makes frying eggs easy. On the other hand, if you have never seen an egg or a frying pan and your only weapon is a cookbook, it is much harder to learn how to do it. Gurdjieff taught us by example ways, which was invaluable training. To have to approach the problem of creating new physical habits by reading a book about how to do it is much more difficult. And I often think that it is the crux of the problem which faces sincere seekers today. Since there is no place like the Priory for them to go to, they go to group meetings and read books, which forces all the discipline to come through their intellect rather than through their bodies. The same is true of emotional training. You can learn in an instant the reason for human conflicts and emotional misunderstandings if you are in a position to see people going through them. And Gurdjieff created friction at the Priory in order to produce just such conflicts. Yes, we were fortunate. I might even admit to the word lucky. Finally, I think there is an emotional attitude that seems to me healthier as well as proper to mankind, certainly preferable to continually bemoaning one's fate in this vale of tears. It is a vale of tears only if we decide emotionally to think of it as such. I learned to like life when I was a child, often simply because Gurdjieff managed to make it seem ridiculous and therefore amusing. The conscious use of humour, at which he was an expert, reduces the greatest human drama to something absurd. Great human drama does not lose its dignity in the process, but it is put into perspective. It is still tragic, perhaps, but tragedy is only the other side of the coin, comedy. Life to me is a gift and a privilege, and perhaps the most important thing I learned from Gurdjieff was that there is nothing wrong with having a good time by, first of all, just living to the hilt. Since life itself is a potential daily miracle, what reason is there to be solemn about what may happen when it comes to an end? And hello there, Kathy. Greetings to you. I hope that you are doing well. And Fritz Peters just laid out there, why these books have a different feeling to the likes of Ouspensky and Bennett, because he learnt sort of by osmosis, maybe you could say. He learnt through observation, through experience, through mimicry, watching Gurdjieff and learning how people are doing it. He uses the example of frying an egg, in the sense that, you can read a book about how to fry an egg, but it's much better if you just watch someone and then you get the gist straight away. And also he's saying about living life to the hilt. And Gurdjieff would say in Beelzebub's Tales, I think it is, that if you're going to do something, go the whole hog, even the postage. And so here we go. Here we have some inquiries, some questions that fascinate most people that he's going to address. So yeah, I'm really enjoying Fritz Peters. He's a great sort of addition to all the books that I've read before, but never Fritz Peters. But this is Chapter 7. In a purely personal sense, I think I can say truthfully that I have a special and perhaps unique problem with anyone who questions me about my association with George Gurdjieff. My first two books, Boyhood with Gurdjieff and Gurdjieff Remembered, are different from most of the books that have been written about Gurdjieff and his teaching for one simple reason. They are personal recollections and did not aspire or attempt to be dissertations on his method or his teaching. That's maybe why they're very nice and have a different taste, for just that reason. Therefore, people rarely approach me as someone who is enlightened about the philosophy behind Gurdjieff's life, but rather on the basis that my childhood relationship with him set me in a very special category. I made him seem human. The other books, according to the readers I have met, concentrate on the higher aspects of Gurdjieff, the seriousness of his teaching, his mission in life, his role in saving the world. In a comparative sense, my books are regarded as simple. They are readable. They are humorous. He was, among other things, a very funny man. And, at least, I hope this is true, they are not pretentious. These facts make me somewhat more available to my readers when they meet me. I am unavailable to the extent that I am purposely hard to find. I'm not in the telephone directory. I travel a lot, and I don't have and never will have a group. But I do meet people because I like people, and I'm approachable because they usually, at least at first, like me. There are, of course, problems about being available. I don't look like an author, or at least so I'm told. I don't look serious enough or something. This is slightly rough going for me, since I don't feel like an author, and I haven't a very good idea of what an author is supposed to look like. I almost never have any money, because when I do, I spend it. In any event, it all adds up to the fact that I don't fit the preconceived notions of the reading public. For this reason, I think, once people meet me and find that I drink, smoke, and in other ways act like an ordinary human being, they feel no qualms about asking questions about Gurdjieff that have little or nothing to do with his school or his work, but unfortunately are the kind of personal questions that fascinate most people. And people, fascinated and curious about Gurdjieff the man, right? Not about the high ideals that we find in Ouspensky, but just, what's he like? And here's a list of questions that often asked. Excuse me. Asking questions about Gurdjieff that have little or nothing to do with his school or his work, but unfortunately are the kind of personal questions that fascinate most people. 1. What was Gurdjieff's sex life like? 2. What did he tell you about sex? 3. What did he do in his bathroom that made it difficult to clean? 4. Did he ever make a pass at you, me? 5. Was he physically attractive or repulsive? And what did he look like naked? Goodness me, what a question that is. What did he look like naked? That's a rather personal question to ask Fritz Peters. My reaction to such questions is a complex one, and I will make an attempt to describe those reactions accurately. First off, they don't alarm me since I understand and admit that, or at least most, First off, they don't alarm me since I understand and admit that all, or at least most of us are curious about other people physically, and I also understand that by asking such questions, the questioner is usually, even if unconsciously, trying to bring the Messiah down to a comprehensible level. High-purpose, serious or grim literature about development, the intensity of events, the need to improve oneself, the need to make life better, or the overwhelming need to save mankind or the world becomes, as an unrelieved and steady diet, boring. On the other hand, I am somewhat disappointed that people confine themselves to personal questions. Hello there, Tahora. I'm happy to have you as well. I hope you're well and have a nice, fun day ahead. The end result of such questioning usually informs me that readers like anecdotes. I like to talk, and I talk a lot. It's a legitimate form of communication between people, assuming, of course, that they understand the English language, which is somewhat rarer than you might think. Just ask someone to tell you the difference between uninterested and disinterested, and you may find out what I mean. To question number 1, I must regretfully inform everyone that I don't know anything at all about Gurdjieff's sex life. Since he had a few children, I am forced to the conclusion that he had one, unless, which I doubt, he invented a personal and early form of artificial insemination. Hello there, Voldemar. I suppose if you're going to be addicted to anything, book club is a good thing to be addicted to because, you'll get through a lot of great books. So nice to have you, Voldemar. Question number 2 is a little more difficult to answer. The only time I ever talked to him directly about sex was in 1946, the last time I saw him. And basically, I talked to him, not the other way round. But he did touch on sex frequently during my time at the Prieuré, and, of course, he had a storehouse, see Boyhood with Gurdjieff, of so-called obscene or dirty jokes, primarily sexual in nature, as most such jokes are. I no longer remember with literal accuracy his exact words when he was questioned about sexual problems, but the gist of his answer to such questioning was that if you could not solve such problems yourself, it would be difficult for him to do so, and that until such problems were solved, there wasn't much of anything he could do for anyone. I think I can safely say that most of the children at the Priory got the basic impression that sex is the source of all energy, that it is the highest function of the physical body, and that when it is combined with the enormous emotional drive of love, in the best sense of the word, it is a very powerful force. The definition of love is important here, and the definition he gave me was that real love is understanding another human being to such an extent that you can really help them, even if your assistance goes temporarily against that person's nature. It is a caring for another person that exceeds any personal desire for gratification or self-fulfillment. It means that when you do something for another person, your aim is to give them what they need and want, not what you need. It is comparable to the difference in buying a Christmas present that someone you love really needs, although you personally may hate the thing you are buying. So consideration becomes the operative word. If you can put yourself in the place of another by objective considering, you probably know something about real love. Sex, in the purely physical sense, that is, the simple driving force that brings people together physically, is something I can only understand as a man. It is an urgent and compelling need that must be given full sway. If it is repressed or suppressed, it can cause havoc. It does not necessarily have anything to do with feeling or with any kind of love. It is a function on that level that is comparable to eating, elimination, or any other need of the body that absolutely has to be satisfied. The curious thing about the human animal, as opposed to any other physical organism, is that sex in humans is not seasonal but is constant, or has become so. I have heard a great many theories about what sex is, but there is only one that makes any real sense to me. The basic function of the sexual drive is procreation. I refuse categorically to argue about anything sexual unless and until that fact is admitted. I'm quite willing to concede that sex may also be to various people a lot of other things: gratification, diversion, a relief from tension and anything else, in addition to the fact that it often appears to be the great human preoccupation. It is also becoming big business. And I've mentioned before that I was reading Abraham Maslow, and his book, A Theory of Human Motivation. And in that he speaks about the different hierarchy of needs, and he also speaks about sex in that book and how, it means different things for different people, as Fritz Peters is talking about here. And just like everyone else, like everything else, it means people have different associations. Hey, well, that sounds like an intense form of study that you're approaching there, Voldemar. You must let me know how it's going. And no, I don't think Mr. Gurdjieff was. Anyone reading this or listening might justifiably ask why I'm writing what may sound like a lecture on the subject. My answer is simply that what I am trying to convey is what Gurdjieff made me understand, more by osmosis than in actual words. When I did tell him specifically in 1946 that I had a lot of good old Middle Western guilt about my own rather checkered sexual career, he brushed the entire subject aside by telling me that what I had done in a sexual sense was unimportant and irrelevant. What was relevant and important was not to have emotional reactions to it, guilt particularly. And what was still much more important was to be able to use sexual energy in life in other channels. In that sense, sex is energy. You can't write a book, paint a picture, compose a symphony, or do anything creative without sexual force. That's where the energy comes from. Being continent is not impossible. In spite of the myriad stories about the sex life of monks, there is a reason why abstinence is a part of the monastic life. That the reason may have been lost in the shuffle through the ages does not mean it never existed. The way to God, to a better life, to goodness, was considered to be necessarily sexless, because the energy was being used to develop one's spirit or soul. Sublimation seems to have become a dirty word, largely thanks to the connotations which have been given it through psychoanalysis. But the root of the word is, after all, sublime, to raise, exalt and uplift. Animals, from my observation of them, don't seem to need to sublimate anything. Men do, and being a good lawyer or doctor or businessman takes an awful lot of hard work and energy, but none of those professions require abstinence, unless some aspects of them can be considered creative by nature. Art, religion, philosophy sometimes do require it, so creativity is, my guess, the link. Sex is procreative, pro as opposed to anti. And this relates there to you, Voldemar, right? And your brahmacharya studies on brahmacharya. And like Fritz Peters was laying out earlier in the chapter, and I don't know if you were here, Voldemar, but of course, reading and studying what brahmacharya is very different to sort of dedicating yourself to the brahmacharya lifestyle. The sannyasi, I think, is another word for it. But yes, we can read about it, but spending a day as one, or a week, or a month, and you must let us know how you're getting on. Voldemar. And hello there, Good Evils. Hello, Good Evils. It says, thank you for doing this. You are another ray of light for humanity. Well, that's very kind of you, Good Evils, and I'm glad that you are enjoying the channel. And that's very kind of you to say so. Regarding what went on in Gurdjieff's bathroom, which seems to fascinate people, want to know why his bathroom was so dirty. Regarding what went on in Gurdjieff's bathroom, which seems to fascinate so many readers, he used it for all the purposes for which a bathroom was intended. He was an extravagant human being in the sense that he did just about everything in a big, or perhaps grand is a better word, way. His aim, need I say more, was not always perfect, which made some of the cleaning chores a little arduous, and he seemed to like to throw things around, towels, sponges, washcloths, anything. He lived abundantly, in or out of the bathroom. It was one of the things I liked best about him. As for making any passes at me, there seems to be a special category of readers, particularly in England, where the traditions of boys' schools are reasonably notorious, which more or less assumes that some form of homosexuality is almost proper. In addition, he was Greek, that is, his parents were Greek, and everyone seems to know about Greek love. One English reviewer referred to me as Gurdjieff's faggot, a word which was seized upon by some readers. Yes, I know Melissa's mind, and this is, I wonder who that English reviewer is. I'll read that again if you missed it. One English reviewer referred to me as Gurdjieff's faggot, a word which was seized upon by some readers. It does not necessarily mean fairy or queer. It is a common term in England for lower-class boys, but since lower-class boys are frequently the sexual targets of older boys, maybe the words are synonymous. Okay. To answer the question about passes, my immediate impulse is to tell anyone that it's none of their business. But for Gurdjieff's sake, let me set that record clear. He was puritanical, even a fanatic about homosexuality, and condemned it vigorously. Interesting anecdote there, I didn't know that. I'm still somewhat surprised when I remember that attitude. It didn't seem particularly appropriate for him, but my own conclusion is that he felt that homosexuality as a career was a dead-end street, and perhaps further, one of nature's defences against overpopulation. He did not say that to me. That's my conclusion, based largely on the fact that he frequently reminded me that nature would manage to get even with mankind if we continued to fight against rather than with the laws of the universe. He never told me that manufacturing the atom bomb was evil, but when he asked me what I thought of America now that it had dropped the bombs on Japan in order to save 150,000 American lives, my final conclusion was that since men are part of both nature and the universe, not the other way round, maybe nature was working through man to decimate and destroy some of the overpopulation. It is one answer to the question about why men have wars, plagues, hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes, and all the similar disasters. I also feel reasonably sure that nature would be impartial and objective about what race that is, was destroyed. As to his physical attractiveness, he wasn't attractive to me in any sexual sense of the word, but given his tremendous magnetism and what people like to call charisma, he was very attractive to anyone who could stand being magnetized. He had an aura that's the only word that comes to mind, that was obvious to anyone. He was also sensual, earthy, charming, devious, funny, and clothed with an emotional and physical warmth. As for his body, if someone insists on knowing about that, he was not very tall, rather swarthy, not particularly hairy, and had a pretty well-developed pot belly. Plus, sorry, serious. Let's be serious. As for his body, if someone insists on knowing about that, he was not very tall, rather swarthy, not particularly hairy, and had a pretty well-developed pot belly, plus all the requisite number of limbs, and specifically, he did have sexual organs that looked like perfectly normal ones to me. The only physical peculiarity that struck me was that his bottom didn't protrude much. His back was a straight line from his shoulders to the base of his buttocks, as if his legs were placed slightly forward of his spinal column. I got to know his body pretty well in the Turkish bath, because one of my intermittent jobs was to rub his back, and then walk not only on his back, but also on his pot belly. I considered it quite an honour. Well, you don't get that in Ouspensky, do you? You don't get that in Ouspensky, that's for sure. Gurdjieff's naked body being described in great detail. Voldemar says, and that some brahmacharya are fools and not always practice lead to enlightenment. No, that's right, Voldemar. Just because you abstain from sex and eat one meal a day and do your meditation, yeah, nothing is promised, is it? Nothing's a given. And so, yeah, there's many ways up the mountain. That's right, Voldemar. I'm sure you could, again, might be rather disrespectful, but we've got a very good picture of Gurdjieff's naked body, so I'm sure you could put it into one of these AI image generation models and get a rather telling resemblance, I'm sure. Chapter 8. I had a curious experience not long ago in a bookstore that deals mainly in occult books. I happen to know the owner and his staff fairly well, and the manager of the store asked me if I would like it to autograph the copies of Boyhood with Gurdjieff and Gurdjieff Remembered that were on the Gurdjieff shelf. I was happy to do so, but when I replaced the books, a young woman dressed rather appropriately, disciple fashion, in a toga-like gown, seized my books and began inserting bookmarks in them. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "If you want to know, why don't you buy a copy of the book?" I took it upon myself, since I had assumed that the young lady was an employee of the bookstore, to ask the manager what she was doing. He confronted her at once and pointed out that she had no right or authority to come into the store armed with bookmarks to insert in all of the books that had been written by or about Gurdjieff. The particular bookmark she was inserting that day was decorated at the top with a couple of flying angels and read, "Gurdjieff Ouspensky Centers Accepting Students," and then listed Carmel, Portland, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And I think I may even and I think I might have that same thing. I remember the angels at the top. I'm sure I do, in fact, have that bookmark. So it managed to sneak into one of my books. And yes, Stephen Lahn, this is a very different side to Gurdjieff, metaphorically and literally. The young woman was what I guess could be called contrite and more or less, lying through her teeth, promised not to come into the store again. What is remarkable to me is that she was just one of a series of, presumably, disciples who go around advertising Gurdjieff, a manifestation which I seriously doubt he needs. Prior to her attack on his books, some other outfit had been doing the same thing, but their bookmark was decorated in colour with a reproduction of the Enneagram and read Gurdjieff Ouspensky Centers, Carmel, Fellowship Farm, Honolulu, Lake Tahoe, Los Angeles, Portland, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, and Seattle. The following day, and I'm not making this up, the manager and I came across a new one in my books and in All and Everything. This bookmark had a silhouette of Gurdjieff and also one of Ouspensky, as well as a diagram of the Enneagram, and gives a telephone number in Las Vegas. I assume they are referring to Las Vegas, Nevada, and not Las Vegas, New Mexico, but I think it would have been a little more realistic to have included the area code. Some people have heard of the New Mexico, Las Vegas, but perhaps the Las Vegas group assumes, maybe mistakenly, that an anxious student would try both states. In case you are tempted to get in touch with them, the proper area codes are 505 for New Mexico and 702 for Nevada. Why do I even mention this? Well, it seems to me that it is presumptuous for anyone to put a bookmark in a book that I wrote, and I think that it is completely unnecessary to advertise Gurdjieff to anyone. Perhaps the question is open to argument, but I am sufficiently exercised about it to be fairly certain that I could win the argument hands down. The only conceivable, logical, and rational reason for distributing bookmarks which proclaim that they are accepting students is to make money. Gurdjieff is good business these days. People stare at the occult shelves in bookstores and seem to be pondering a solution. I think I am capable of understanding the dilemma of modern man. Many people seem to feel an urgent need to find something different and better, which brings us back to the seeker, the eternal student. My first and rather immature reaction to these advertising bookmarks was that I was offended. I felt as if the perpetrators of the bookmarks had trespassed on something that was important to me. On reflection, I no longer feel that way. It was only a reaction. When I regained my perspective, it seemed to me that something Gurdjieff said many years ago was actually coming to pass. He stated, and I am paraphrasing, that if everyone who studied with him went out into the world and influenced at least 10 other people, then the purpose of his work would have been achieved. He did not specify what he meant by the word influence, and while many of these groups that are accepting students are run, or so I am informed, by people who never knew him and have done little more than glance at All and Everything, I'm not at all sure that their inexperience matters. Whatever else they may be doing, they are spreading the word and attracting interest to what Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and others did in the past. There has always been a certain amount of mystery surrounding the work of Gurdjieff, a mystery that he may well have helped to create and one that has certainly been perpetuated by many of his followers. On the other hand, there is something new in the wind. I find now that it is practically impossible to get away from some form of the Gurdjieff work. The followers are legion. I don't really know how this can be a bad thing. For some people, I think inevitably the work is going to become some sort of crutch, something to do that at least seems to be better than doing nothing, but hopefully something is going to rub off on everyone involved. In thinking about these developments, I also began to think about the fact that what was appropriate for Gurdjieff in the 1920s and before that may not have been appropriate now. The Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man was his way of disseminating what he had acquired in the course of his life. But I believe that it is important to realize what has happened in the world since that time. I think it would be realistic to say that the establishment of a lot of institutes or priories would not be the way to do it today. The revolution that has taken place and continues to take place since the post-World War I era has changed all that. Among other things, we now have aeroplanes. Lindbergh has not even flown the ocean when I first knew Gurdjieff. Radios, televisions, computers, and all the rest. Life goes so fast that it is hard to maintain any kind of equilibrium in one's daily life. And he's speaking in 1970, I think it was. In 1978, life goes so fast that it is hard to maintain any kind of equilibrium in one's daily life. So we think that it's only because of the internet and social media that life feels frantic and too fast. But in 1978, because of radios and televisions and computers and all the rest, it's the same experience for Fritz Peters and anyone living in that time. So perhaps it's a human thing rather than an environmental thing. The roles of men and women are being altered on an almost daily basis. Just look at ERA and women's lib, unisex, gay liberation movements, the massive trade in pornography. In one sense, all of this is nothing more than the swing of the pendulum, and perhaps some equanimity will be restored when the pendulum starts swinging back again. In the meantime, we are where we are, and we are the way we are. I'm speaking primarily of America, since I live in America and do not know whether this wildfire of occult law has taken over the rest of the world to the same extent. What impresses me about all this is the intensity, I could say avidity, with which people have become involved in either the Gurdjieff work or some similar work. Everywhere I go, people are reading the I Ching, wearing yellow robes and dancing in the streets, meditating, reading ponderous tomes, and so on. Well, why not? Some of it surely is a defensive and self-protective reaction to the incredible nonsense with which we are surrounded in our daily lives. Television, music, noise, progress, you name it. If anything disturbs me on an immediate basis, it is perhaps that when one encounters group members or seekers, they do appear to be possessed of a great deal of information about wisdom, etc. But they also seem to find it hard to apply it in any manner that is going to do them any good. Many of them will confess that they feel, regardless of the knowledge they have acquired through reading and or working with some self-proclaimed leader, that they are basically fairly worthless. On the whole, that is a pretty good reaction for them to have. It is a first step. Knowing that you are rotten may be the first stage in getting down to doing something about that state. It may even end up helping the world if everyone begins to understand that we are not the fine, upstanding people that we are often led to believe. If there is a disturbing element in all this, it is the impulse in man that causes them to destroy their gods or prophets by making them into symbols. St. Patrick's Cathedral is a tomb to Jesus Christ. At least I think it is supposed to be. And I also think that it is a great place for pomp and ceremony. But what, I ask, does that have to do with the teachings of Jesus Christ? Instead of really learning from great men, we seem to have to sublimate, elevate, and, as it were, evaporate them. I wonder how many temples are going to be erected in Gurdjieff's honor. I have no answer to that, but I hope the energy will be used in other directions than building buildings. Wow. So, again, another very interesting chapter. And in the sense, it is interesting. I've actually been thinking about sort of my own, reflecting on what I'm doing here as a sort of proponent of Gurdjieff, or what does he call them? Seekers, group members, seekers. What else? He's rather what does he call them? The eternal student, the seeker. Disciple. Anyway, it's all labels, but yeah, because I've sort of had a reaction to other people, and I'm sure that many other people have a reaction to me. But I suppose the reaction is with the individual having the reaction, right? And not the person doing the thing. Because, like I say, if people come and they say, oh, this guy's just too bookish, and then they go off, well, that's okay, right? They can have that experience and that impression and go and go on their merry way. And so I think, as Ouspensky says in the fourth way, right, the only thing is to awaken. And if reading these great books, and I try my best to not sort of take liberties with the ideas, as I say, I try not to take liberties. I try to always go back to the text and the material. And that's what I find valuable, you know. Beelzebub's tales was to his grandchildren or his grandson and not to his son. So and so I think this will be the last chapter, chapter 9 for this evening, and then we'll have another couple of sessions probably. Yeah, but last chapter for this evening, and we'll be back tomorrow to carry on. And then I think we might have a break on Wednesday and get into some Ouspensky. And for me, I always find it helpful anyway, the books, the text, the information, when I find myself in the past, you know, drifting deeper and deeper into sleep, as Stephen says, becoming a domestic robot, as Stephen's put out. Just going back to a text, even just pick up the fourth way, open it at any page, and there's going to be something in there that'll help you to wake up, or at least sort of prompt you towards awakening. And obviously, by reading this book, we get to know Gurdjieff much better as the person, the man, and as 5 or 10 minutes ago, his naked body, if that's what people are interested in. Melissa's Mind says, Lewis, I couldn't take it. I uninstalled Facebook. Well, Melissa's Mind says Facebook was making me sick. And I listened to a great podcast the other day saying Facebook, I think it was 2016 or 17 or 18, they sort of ran an experiment on all the users. And what people don't maybe realize is when you consent to the user agreement, no one reads those things, do they? There's a great South Park episode also that plays on that, but no one reads the terms and conditions. We all just scroll to the bottom, click yes, and go. When you do that with Facebook in this period, you're agreeing to sort of be A/B tested, to be tested on. And it's very dark and disturbing. So we won't get into that. But yeah, I think stay away from social media as best as you can, I think. But come back to book club because it's wholesome social media, you could argue. Stephen Lance says, we haven't seen anything yet, I fear. Domestic robots, anyone? And what are you referring to specifically there, Stephen? And yes, I have seen Tesla shared a video the other day of their Optimus robot dancing very animatedly, and it's a scary time. What a time we're alive in, eh? Hello there, Jean. I'm doing very well, thanks, my friend, and I hope you are too. Yes, it may well be Melissa's Mind, that's right, and it's easier to, Melissa said, the content may be over their heads, and it may be, and if it is, it's easier to tear down the person than realize that maybe there's a gap, a hole in one's understanding, and address that. It's easier just to attack the person. Hello there, JD. Welcome. And Voldemar says, yes, Facebook is another strange thing. Dark indeed, easy to be addicted. It certainly is. It's doom scrolling. There's a lot of information. You can watch The Social Dilemma. I write about it a little bit in my own book, actually, but the documentary The Social Dilemma, Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation, all of that go into how these billion-dollar corporations are vying for our attention. And at times it's difficult. Of course, it's very difficult to be sensible and find some balance. And Graham says, I wonder if it was men or women who asked Peters about Gurdjieff. You mean particularly those few questions, Graham, yeah? What were the questions? I don't know, we've read that bit. What was Gurdjieff's sex life like? What did he tell you about sex? What did he do in his bathroom that made it difficult to clean? Did he ever make a pass at you? Was he physically attractive or repulsive? And what did he look like naked? I don't know, Graham. Probably both, right? Both sexes would likely be interested in different aspects of those questions. So I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that, Melissa's mind. And yes, let me know if you do get into it. Send me an email and I'd love to hear your feedback. Stephen Lance says, yes, social media is a madhouse in my experience. So I cleaned it off my machines as well. Peeling potatoes is no longer a human-only thing. Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Jean. Well, a lot of attacks going on there. Jean, well, look after yourselves and seek some help and support if you can, if there's some around. But last chapter for this evening, my friends. Yes, Voldemort. Chapter 9. I've avoided one major question that is not only asked of me, but which I also frequently asked myself. Why was I, an American born in Madison, Wisconsin in 1913, selected to be a son or heir of Gurdjieff? Possibly the whole thing was an accident, although I gather that Freud, a man whose theories I tend to distrust, says there are no accidents. Much as I dislike personal history, perhaps it is only fair for me to do a little revealing of why I, for one, think my association with Gurdjieff was not entirely accidental. I don't think that I am significant enough to consider myself a part of a grand design, but I think that certain individuals are destined to meet. According to the parental folklore that has been passed on to me, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin on Sunday, March the 2nd, 1913 at 4:12 p.m. The hour is not folklore, it is on my birth certificate. I left Madison, and so anyone interested in astrology, if anyone's interested in astrology, either Vedic or Western, you could draw up a pretty accurate what the hell's the word for the natal chart. You could draw up a very accurate natal chart and do a reading of Fritz Peters, because he gives you all of the information required to draw up a natal chart. So if anyone's doing that, let me know. I left Madison under my parents' power when I was about 6 months old, and I seem to have been travelling ever since. But early in the game, and this is significant to me, I became the subject of various disasters. The first disaster, so I'm told, was that my mother put something called anti-phlogiston on my chest because I had a chest cold. I gather that I must have still been in Wisconsin, therefore less than 6 months old, when this particular disaster occurred. I apparently cried a lot after the application of this remedy, and it turned out that she had put it on too hot. It was a very cold night, and my hands were cold, she explains, so that I have on my chest what passports like to call an identifying scar. I still have it, although it is no longer as prominent as it once was, thanks to the growth of some hair on my chest. Disaster number 2 was that my brother stuck a crochet hook in my right eye when I was still pretty much of a baby. Sibling rivalry might be the reason for this. I neither know nor care. My mother, who, according to her version of the incident, had left us alone for some urgent and justifiable purpose, removed the crochet hook when she returned to the house, but no one called a doctor or examined my eye. Disaster number 3 occurred when I was left in the tender care of my maternal grandmother, who was, among other things, a Christian Scientist. As the story goes, she put me in the bathtub and then went to answer the telephone or to make a telephone call, and I turned on the hot water and was unable to turn it off. Since my grandmother was also deaf, my screams did not reach her, and it was not until a neighbour in the same apartment house in Chicago came down to our apartment and got Grandma to open the door that I was discovered at least partly parboiled. My mother tells this story with a certain indignation, because her mother then placed me on a bath towel and telephoned her practitioner in Indianapolis. The unnamed Good Samaritan, who had interrupted the first telephone conversation, had the foresight to rub something, unguentine, butter or something like that, on me, which prevented me from being just one large scar. I'm glad to be able to say that none of these events are things which I can remember personally. Omitting such trivial traumas as my mother's divorce from my father when I was aged 18 months or so, I don't think it really matters how old I was, and set up housekeeping with a young English patent attorney. The ensuing disasters are ones that I do remember. In 1919, we were living in Chicago, and I developed influenza. It was the epidemic. I was locked in a room, and while the doctor did make it, I can remember his being there at least once, it was more or less the foregone conclusion that I would not survive. I did, but when I recovered, I put on what was called an Indian suit, with fringe on the side of the trousers and a feather headdress. For some reason, the electric wiring in our apartment had not been completed, and while leaning out of the window in an attempt to drop a metal bank on some innocent passerby, the fringe on my pants became entangled in some open, unconnected wires in an as-yet-to-be-installed electric outlet, and I caught on fire. With great presence of mind, my mother instructed my brother, 6.5 at the time, to roll me up in a rug and put the fire out. We moved to Ravinia, Illinois, shortly after this episode, and I remember vividly the day I came home from school with a very sore left eye. I was taken to a doctor this time and was told that I had an ulcer in my left eye and would have to wear a patch on it for about a week. I rather liked the patch. It made me look like a pirate, but since my right eye had been blinded by the crochet hook, I couldn't see anything. Nothing much was done about that. Maybe there was a shortage of good medical help in Illinois in those days, and it wasn't until I was about 21 that I rediscovered the fact that I had only one good eye. The character of the various disasters began to change at that point. I was about 8 or 9. I can pinpoint that only because my half-sister, Linda, who is 8 years younger than I am, was a baby at the time. My mother had a nervous breakdown. I think that was the term in those days, and was sent to some sort of sanatorium in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Sorry, I struggled with that one. Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Probably mispronouncing it, but forgive me. When they took her out of the house, clamped to a stretcher, I asked my stepfather what had happened, and he said, "I will never forget the words. Your mother might as well be dead. She's lost her mind." Goodness me. That's something to hear as a sort of 8-year-old. Your mother might as well be dead. She's lost her mind. Goodness. Margaret Anderson and Jane Heap, who were then running the Little Review in Chicago, intervened. It must have been about 1919 or 1920. Due to my mother's illness and the fact that my stepfather, who was not as yet actually married to my mother, didn't have any need for two stepchildren, Jane and Margaret decided to adopt my brother, Tom, and myself. I didn't consider this a disaster at the time. Perhaps it wasn't, but there were times when I have thought it was. I will not belabor the fact here that while Jane and Margaret were interesting, vital, amusing, and sophisticated women, they were slightly miscast for the roles of mother and father. And this is a really good biographical section on Fritz Peters and how he came to be at Gurdjieff Priory. We, Tom and I, were taken to New York by Jane and Margaret. Jane was the parent in an active sense. Margaret had other things on her mind which are related with considerable style in her autobiographical books, My 30 Years' War, The Fiery Fountains, and Strange Necessity. And the formal procedure of legal adoption was initiated. This became complicated when my father decided to get into the act and made some sort of objection to the adoption proceedings. The judge, and this is more hearsay than memory, decided that the case was a complex one and that Tom and I should decide between our various alternatives. 1. Remain in the technical care of our stepfather, which was actually impossible since he was not really a step anything. He and my mother were not yet married. 2. Live with Jane in New York. Margaret, by this time out of the house and involved in her great friendship with Georgette LeBlanc. Or 3. Live in Washington, D.C. with my father's great-aunt, or perhaps she was my great-aunt. She must have been in her 60s because she had enough money to provide for us, which my father did not. That's very interesting, Stephen. And was she always sort of alluding to your chart? That's what these astrologers have a tendency to do. Any sort of, they'll always allude, oh, that's your Mars in the second house, Stephen. That's your Mars in the second house. You can't escape it. My decision was a fairly obvious one. I knew the perils of life with Jane Heap and had coped with them for at least a year or so. Life with my stepfather was legally out of the question, and a new life with an aged, at least to me, relative was unknown, i.e. perilous. I chose to stay with Jane and Margaret, although Margaret was only a flitting presence. Her name was necessary on the adoption papers because I believe she was a blood relative. Life with Jane and Margaret turned out to be a major change for both of us. New York City helped. Having been accustomed to a rather hayseed style of life, more or less in the country, we found ourselves abruptly transplanted to one of the great cities of the world, living in an apartment where the Little Review was being turned out every month, going to theatres and operas and meeting people who were reasonably famous at the time: Otto Kahn, Mabel Dodge, Luhan, E. Cummings, and so on. Where the money came from, I do not know, but we had a duplex apartment on 11th Street, complete with grand piano. Jane made drapes out of black linoleum, built tables, painted paintings. She could do anything, and we lived in what I thought of as a rather high style. My brother and I went to a private school, and to my astonishment, never having been much good at things physical, my country upbringing stood me in good stead. I became captain of the basketball team, a good baseball player, and I could outrun anyone in the school. In spite of all these things, the negative side of Jane Heap was predominant. The next disaster, if that is the correct word, needs a little explaining. I quote the following from Margaret Anderson's book, My 30 Years' War, in order to explain something about Jane. So this is a rather long quote from, as he's just said, I don't know why I'm repeating it, Margaret Anderson's My 30 Years' War. And I think we'll read at some point, Graham mentioned the other day, her book, Unknowable Gurdjieff, we'll throw into the mix as well. But this is Margaret Anderson speaking about Jane Heap in her book, The 30 Years' War. Quote, I had come upon an element in Jane's nature with which it was impossible for me to cope. That is, I can cope with it whenever I find it. Anyone can. No one should. I refer to that tendency to live life on the basis of personal conflict, that drama of compensations which to me is entirely devoid of interest. It is so simple to live without these confusions, much too simple, says Jane. For all her intelligence, Jane acts upon an ancient instinct that life without dramatics is likely to become bovine. This was particularly unjust in relation to me. I am no partisan of the simple life. I adore personal manias. No relationship could interest me that hadn't a long pendulum of manias, moods, exploited foibles, 1,000 dramatized reserves. These are the conscious dramas, the charming unrealities that I demand. The unconscious dramas are the realities that I avoid, the small vulgarities known as bad humour, the disagreeable answer, the distortion of the impersonal into the personal, those capacities known as brooding, sulking, pouting, the necessity to assert one's domination, the preoccupation with one's own self-importance, the egoism which conceals its wounds by being lofty about something else. I wish to state that all these manifestations of the human animal bore me. Jane hasn't them all. She doesn't need more than one or two of them, since she possesses these to such magnitude. I don't know what poor human being first discovered the fact that the surest way to hold people's interest is to subject them to torment. It is true, but it's so obnoxious a fact that one would be ashamed to act upon one's discovery. If you have an imagination, you don't need induced drama. Just once to have realized that the person you love will one day die and what you can do about it. Just once to have understood that you will die and will, in all probability, have found out nothing, either of life or death. That is enough drama for a lifetime. But people don't reflect on these things. They achieve a great sense of living thoroughly those conflicts known as scenes. Men, even when bored, are flattered under such ministrations. Women are no better. In fact, the human race declares that it hates scenes and is in reality enamoured of little else. My freedom from scenes gave Jane no freedom for power. It became irresistible to her to see if I couldn't in some way be drawn into the attraction of the human whirlpool. End quote. And that is from My 30 Years' War. Back to Fritzy. Margaret and I had, as I hope I have indicated, a great bond, and I am in total agreement with her when it comes to human compulsive scenes. I think she and I both suffered in the same way from Jane's particular tyranny, the need to dominate, to have power over other people, and to create continual and compulsive melodrama in life. Jane's compulsion to adopt children was and still remains a mystery to me, but Tom and I were certainly not spared any scenes or emotional dramas, although Tom shared Jane's predilection for them, since he appeared to enjoy many of them. The first thing that Jane apparently decided, although that may be too objective a word, was that it was unfair to Tom that I was ahead of him in school. She enrolled us in the city and country school on 12th Street in New York. It was a very good private school, but it had a curious system of entering children in grades by age, rather than grades such as the 6th, 7th, 8th, etc. I was 10, Tom was 11 and a half, so that I went into the 10s and Tom into the 11s. I'd always been ahead of Tom in school. I was in the 3rd grade when I was 7 and Tom was still in the 1st grade. I felt this imposition, which Jane carefully explained to me as being good for Tom, since it would benefit his ego to be ahead of me for a change, to be both unfair and senseless. Why did I have to be sacrificed to Tom's ego? The head of the school soon found out that I was a problem. She had, so I'm told, agreed to the psychological experiment of developing Tom's ego at what seemed to me to be at my expense. The fact that Tom and I were not the best of friends didn't help matters at all, and Jane's proclivity for creating dreary human dramas came into full play. When the school informed Jane that I would have to be promoted to a higher grade because I was just too active, mischievous, and bright to be held back, Jane's reaction was, first of all, to insist that I not be promoted, and second, to try to solve this fundamental difference between the two of us by combat physical, or physical combat, a fight to the death. Tom was older and liked to fight. I didn't. I was not much smaller than Tom, but I was reasonably strong. Psychologically, however, Jane certainly fastened on an unconscious drama that satisfied all her and perhaps Tom's needs. We were ordered to have a fight. You can't imagine it, can you? 2 children, a 10 and 11-year-old, and your stepmom says, "I know how we'll sort this out. Come on, kids." "I've got an idea. Come on, kids, in the garden." We were ordered to have a fight, dressed only in shorts to see who could beat whom up. I refused to fight. I explained in a rage that it was no solution to fight physically and that I wouldn't. This seemed to please both Tom and Jane, and the result was that I was beaten up. Jane finally stopped the fight when I was bleeding badly, led me to the bathroom where I could bleed in the bathtub, and when the bleeding stopped, ordered me to clean the bathtub. Physical prowess has never impressed me, and Jane, to her and Tom's later regret, found that nothing had been accomplished. From a rather puzzled child who took life more or less as it came, I turned into a vengeful human being, a result that anyone with common sense should have been able to foresee. The real result was that I had done, by simply following my own nature, something really devastating to Tom. I had turned the other cheek, and his victory was certainly Pyrrhic. I didn't really care much one way or the other. I was enraged, bitter, furious, and simply decided in my own unconscious way that life was a battleground, and I was, whatever else I might also be, a winner. It was not so much that I was determined to win. I did win. I won because I refused to lose anything. The final so-called disaster occurred when Jane, in a fit of anger, I was 11, struck me with a board from a crate with nails in it. Jane lost that one, or I won it, depending on how you look at it, because although the nails went all the way into my back and I was bleeding, I did not break down, cry, or otherwise participate in the scene. Jane was more than contrite, fell to her knees, hugged me, and begged for my forgiveness. I think that was the first time that my born rage to live turned into active hatred. I told her that I would not only not forgive her, it was not my province, was one of the things that I said, but I told her that I would get even. I regret in the long run to have to admit that I did, on the same compulsive, unconscious, dreary level. All of this is preliminary to my meeting with Gurdjieff in July 1924. I met him some 2 months after the incident with the board and nails. He told me much later, in 1946, that I was necessary to him for 2 reasons. I came to him as a wounded animal. He advised me to research the word wounded and suggested French. I think the advice was significant. The French word for wounded is blesseur, which comes finally from the word blessed. And I needed him badly. As it turns out, he also needed me. And that's all for tonight, my friends. That was a very interesting and insightful chapter, like knowing, getting to know Fritz Peters a bit better, and also Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson. I imagine they're those books by Margaret Anderson, where she speaks about Jane Heap. I think I got Jane Heap's autobiography the other day as well. Undiscovered Country, I think it's called. Got too many books coming in, I can't even remember. But yes. Excuse me. So yeah, that's all for this evening, my friends, and we'll be back tomorrow for another few chapters of Balanced Man. And then Wednesday night, Ouspensky's The Fourth Way, and maybe Thursday morning or afternoon, we'll finish whatever's left of Balanced Man. And then, as I said, at the weekend, Sunday night, we will read Dostoevsky's, or begin reading Dostoevsky's The Double. It's a rather long text. And so we'll try and bite off a big chunk on Sunday evening. And then, as always, progress slowly through the week. And who knows what we'll read next, but there's many great books on my to-be-read book club pile, and I'll be sure to share them all with you in a poll. But for now, I'll say, thanks everyone for joining. A rather entertaining section and part, as Fritz Peters seems to be very entertaining and interesting also. But my friends, I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll be back tomorrow for part 3 and another few chapters. So take care, look after yourselves, and I'll hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye guys. Take care now. See you.